See if that'll stay. I'll pitch this over here just to get it out the camera. Well, good morning. It's a blessing to be here. We've been praying about this for a while, and it's exciting to finally be here. First thing I'd like to do is introduce some folks. My loving wife. And then my kids are spread out, so bear with me. Paul, all the way in the back. And then Andrew, right there. You can stand up. Okay. I won't make my other guests stand up, but we're privileged this morning to also have with us my mother-in-law, who's been spending the summer with us. That's Judy. She's sitting right next to Dina. And then from Chattanooga, we have Ben on the very back row and his mother, Bernadette. And I saved Earl for last because I've got a few things I want to talk about with Earl, but Earl's visiting us from North Carolina. He just got in last night at midnight. And so if he nods off, it's not only because he's being like a heathen, but he's probably pretty tired. So start, and of course, we can't forget Nathan Lee. He's with us on the wall. So Nate is our oldest. Most of you know him. He's down in Soldotna right now working with the wildlife troopers. Actually, he's not in Soldotna right now. Last I heard he was in Cantwell, but he might, I don't have any idea what's going on there. He might be traveling, but he's getting a full taste of what working for the state is like. He was on his way to Cantwell for some work that they were doing up there a couple days ago. He got about an hour from Cantwell, and they called him and said, "Oh, by the way, we need you to stop in Palmer on your way and get a trailer." He said, "I'm already an hour from Cantwell, from Soldotna." So he had to turn around and go back to Palmer to get a trailer because they didn't figure that out until the morning of. But when we first came to Alaska, we came to Alaska in 2001 on our survey trip. I answered the call to Alaska in 1996. Dina and I had just recently been married, and we wanted to know, we knew that the Lord was calling us into missions, but we didn't know where. And so we spent some time praying and fasting. I was on board ship in the Mediterranean. She was in Capodichino, Italy. And the next opportunity that we had to talk about it, we both felt this burden in our hearts for Alaska. Now, neither one of us had ever been to Alaska. Neither one of us knew anything about Alaska. All I knew is that God wanted me to do something that was frontier oriented. In other words, reaching out to people where there was not any established work, perhaps never had been any established work. And so the Lord didn't give us the opportunity to come up here until 2001, and that was in September. I was due to discharge September 29th of 2001. We were up here more or less on terminal leave, and while we were here, the World Trade Centers were attacked, and our survey trip changed drastically. There was only one village that I was able to get into, and that was Anaktutik Pass. So I just figured, okay, Lord, you let me get into one village. That's easy math for me. I can count that high. Perhaps that's where you want us to go. And so while we're on deputation, well, let me back up just a moment. I had spent that year while getting prepared to leave active military service, getting a schedule put together for deputation. Most churches like to be about a year out on their schedule. Well, we had two things happen. We had the World Trade Centers attacked. My discharge, the most memorable moment in that, aside from seeing those images, was the President of the United States coming on the television and saying, first of all, if you're on leave, report to the nearest military installation. Your leave is canceled. And second of all, if you're due to discharge, your discharge is put on hold. So my discharge was I got a new ID card that in the spot where it says your date for military service ends, mine said IDF, indefinite. I don't know that I like that. Can we just maybe put 6 month renewal process? But then also I was diagnosed with cancer there at the end of September. And so again, I was retained on active duty until I got a clean bill of health. Well, that kind of upset my apple cart on deputation. So I didn't have all that time to go travel around. I was having to report and do the normal military stuff. And it was in May of 2002. I was at a meeting in Michigan and that I had leave for, and the family and I went over there. And my chief called me up and he says, well, I got good news or bad news for you, depending on your perspective. We've got a clean bill of health for you, and so you've got 2 weeks to decide whether or not you're going to re-enlist or discharge. And so I had 2 weeks to put a deputation schedule together. And so from that point, we went on deputation for a couple of years, and Lord blessed. And when we got to Alaska, though, what we intended to do was not just go out to the village. We wanted to acclimate ourselves with Alaska. Alaska was very new for us in many ways. I grew up in Hawaii. Dina grew up in Southeast Texas. We were in the Mediterranean when we received the call. And so the Lord allowed us to go to Buffalo, New York for a few years to kind of get a little bit acclimated to the weather up here. And so it was during our time of being involved in local Fairbanks North Pole ministry there at Badger Road that I really started to build a relationship with Earl Malthus. And the ministry that Earl Malthus has is Mission Air Care. And so our friendship, and it was more of a friendship at the time than anything. And, so while I was helping out at Badger Road Baptist Church, some of you may remember the time that we came into Alaska was also the time that Pastor Wayne Harding left, retired, and Brother Nils Degerlin became pastor there at Badger Road. So the weekend that we came into Alaska was also the weekend that Brother Nils Degerlin, or maybe there was a week or two apart, became pastor there. So we were helping out there at the church at Badger Road Baptist Church. At the same time, I was just kind of thumbing a ride with Earl, giving him some road company going up to Circle. And there was a event there in Circle that kind of changed the course of what my mind was in regard to our ministry in Alaska. As Earl and I were driving that 4 hours to go up the road, he'd been trying to fly in there, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Earl, but he had flown in there a few times. There was a lady there in the village that said, yeah, we'd love to have church. You fly in and we'll have the church lights on, fire built, and we'll be waiting for you. And he would fly in and walk to the church, and it would be cold, dark, and empty. Does that sound right? And so he decided that he needed to drive and go and visit some folks. So that's a long drive. It's winter time. It's good to have some company. And we did this for a few weeks. And as we're driving out there, I kept thinking to myself, why is it that none of the churches in Fairbanks are reaching out to this village? How is it this village can go as long as it has gone and there not be any established work here? And, it's often we develop a call out of being critical sometimes. As I'm musing over this, the Lord is saying in the back of my head somewhere, well, how about you, pal? What are you doing? How are you so busy that you can't handle this? And so as I'm dealing with this, Earl had some planned meetings throughout the latter part of winter. This was February time frame, and so he makes mention up at the front to those that we'd had assembled that he was going to be spending the rest of the next couple of months down the lower 48, and so would not be coming up again the following weekend. So after the service, this girl walks up to me, and she's about 10 years old. She comes up to me and she says, "How about you? When are you going to quit coming?" And I thought about that. I thought, that's what these people are used to. They're used to vacation Bible school. They're not used to a missionary coming in and saying, "I'm going to dedicate my time to you." And so in that few moments, I looked at her and I said, "I tell you what, I can't make very many promises to you, but this I will. I will keep coming up here until the Lord tells me it's time to go somewhere else. Is that fair?" And she says, "In which end?" Which in which end can mean a lot of different things. And so I wasn't sure if it was a good or a bad but that's all I got out of her. And so Lord hasn't told me to go anywhere else. But what the burden that he has given me, though, is there's a lot of other villages. Can we turn these lights off? I don't know if it'll help much in July in Alaska. There we go. But out in the Yukon Flats, there's a lot of small villages. The Gwich'in Athabascan Indians are not tribal. They are clannish. They're not like your Eskimo or your Lakota Indians in the lower 48, where you've got thousands of them that are in one place. They don't do well that way. It's like putting a bunch of nitroglycerin in a box. I had a 9-year-old Gwich'in tell me one day that the worst thing that ever happened to his people was a milk cut. He said, "We are not meant to be this close to each other. There all this fighting and violence and alcohol is because we're not meant to be this close together." And they don't. They're very clannish. They're not tribal. And what we have out here in the Yukon Flats with these little villages that are spread out is an extreme difficulty in reaching them with the gospel. You could use the river, but it's going to take you a day in between each village. You could, during the winter time, you could use snow machine on the river. And again, it's going to take you a lot of time in between each village. Out there in the Yukon Flats, Circle, which is down around here somewhere, there's been an established ministry now for about 15 years, praise the Lord. Fort Yukon has had an established ministry for 45 years, I believe. And right now, for what it's worth, when we went to Fort Yukon, actually is one of the villages that we visited when we came up in 2001. There was a young man that was living with Ronnie Starr at the time. He, over the course of time that he was there, had a lot of kids that, for whatever reason, were not able to be at home with their parents, and he would raise up a pretty good handful, he and his wife. And one of those young men is now pastoring that church in Fort Yukon. And that's a blessing, because our goal is to reach a man where we're at, to reach their own people. That's the end goal. Not me be there for 20 years and hand it off to another white guy who's going to be there for another 20 years. The idea of transitioning it from a mission work to a church. But the reality out here is there's no line of missionaries at the border in Alaska trying to get to these villages, because some of them are 50 people. Some of them are 100 people. Some of them are 400 people. But it's a difficult environment. One, they don't want us there. Two, there's no place to rent like this. You don't go into Chalkitsik and rent a storefront and hang a plaque out there that says Chalkitsik Baptist Church. The facility is not available. And so we're left with few options. And one of the options that and this is just me, I'm a planner. I like to think things out. God rarely ever uses my plans. He's got his own. I'm okay with that. His work better than mine. Well, his work, mine don't. But I look at this area as a circuit riding ministry. I mentioned this last time we were here. But we can't get a horse and buggy and attack the Yukon Flats. We need a different tool. And that tool has been an airplane. An airplane has been a successful tool for missions in Alaska for decades. And that hasn't changed. And I go back to Earl just because he's here with us. He's doing the maintenance to get our airplane back into an airworthy state so that we can start using it again. It's been down for over a year, and it's one of those where I've been chomping at the bit and praying and asking the Lord, to help, and so I'm thankful that He is doing that. But these villages that have the red circle have no gospel witness. There has never been, to my knowledge, in these villages, with the exception of maybe a vacation Bible school or somebody flying in and passing out tracts, there has never been an established ministry in any of these towns. And so what we're wanting to do, and we ask that you would pray for us and pray with us in this, is every week fly into one of these villages. So in the course of a month, we will be able to conduct a service in one of these villages once a month, which is better than what they have now. Now, obviously, we can't just go in there and start having church services. That's go in there and pass out tracts. Let's go in there and start up doing Bible studies. There's a transition, but the goal is get to the point where we're holding services in each of these villages once a month or once every 45 days. However the Lord adds it. So that's where we're at. We'll roll through some of these. This is our current airplane. I'm going to come back to this slide, but let's just bear with. Something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on also is a ministry that has been open, a door that's been opened to us called the Zulu Project, where this church in North Carolina is underwriting, if that's the right word. They're the financial backing for building, restoring a P206 for us to use up here. Our 182 is a great airplane, but it only seats 4, and there's 5 of us in our family. And so the 206 actually seats 6 people and some stuff, which is not your ordinary. Most airplanes have 4 seats in them, but you can't actually fly with 4 people. The 206 will. It's going to be a great tool for us to use up here. Right now, it's pretty rough. I think the airplane was originally purchased for $16,000. Is that right? 15. So on the open market, this airplane should go somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000. So getting it for $15,000 means it needs a lot of work. And so the majority of that work Earl is doing in North Carolina, or at least the logistics of getting it done. So Lord willing, within the next year or so, we'll be transitioning from the 182 to the 206 for functionality purposes. We'll pray for that because there's a couple things that have to happen. One, our 182 has to become airworthy very soon. And that's what Earl's up here to work on. And then we have to sell that 182 so that we can put the money into this. Anchor Baptist Church in North Carolina is fronting a good portion of that. But at a certain point, their money's going to run out. We're going to have to take over, and we're going to reimburse their fund in that project so that they can go and do it again. And their plan is to provide an airplane to missionaries for basically about 50 cents on the dollar. So we can't afford the $150,000 to go out and buy a 206. But with what we have in the 182, we can afford the $65,000 to buy one through this project. And so that's a huge blessing that they're doing for us. When I first flew to Arctic Village, I've flown to Circle a lot, and Circle, it's not quite so ominous because you're flying over the road. You've got options, you know, if you have problems. And everybody here knows I've been in one airplane wreck already, 37 hours as a pilot. So it's in my mind, okay, if we have a problem, where am I going to land? And more importantly, can I take off again once I do so? And so, but flying to Arctic Village was different. As soon as I got over the White Mountains, this is what I looked at. This is the Yukon River drainage, Yukon Flats there. Venati is somewhere in this picture. You just can't see it. On my way back from Arctic Village, I was leading the airplane, getting the fuel economy up to where it needed to be, and all was running well. And I got about maybe 5 miles from Venati, and the engine shut down. And I wasn't planning to land in Venati, but all of a sudden that became an option. And you know, thankfully I went through the process, and the engine cranked right back up again. I flew the rest of the way, Earl. Rich. I mean, it was, I had every bit of fuel going in there. I wasn't touching none of that again.
Rich and high.
Rich and high, yes. So a little bit, let me tell you, there was no napping in my mind at all. But it was rather ominous to get out there and recognize there's nowhere out here I can land. It's just me and nothing. But it sure is a pretty picture. But in this nothing is a village with about 400 people that have no gospel witness. That picture that I was standing next to the airplane, that was in Arctic Village. The first thing that somebody said to me in Arctic Village was, "When are you leaving?" That's not the welcome that I was expecting, but that's the thought process that they have out there. Here's Arctic Village Welcome Center. You see how well it's manned. They do have a cool sign, but they were not very welcoming. This is a Rock Crossing Bible Camp during Village Week, there's Nathan there, and the front of our boat that's out on the Tanana River. Along those lines, something that has been a thought of mine. It's not a plan necessarily, but wouldn't it be good for us to have a Bible camp in the interior that is one that the churches that you know, between Badger Road, True North, Two Rivers, where we were doing something not only for our teenagers coming up, but also an outreach. There's a couple of them that are happening around town, but there's a lot of kids in this area that we could maybe do something. And we've got some space out in Chattanooga where maybe we can make that happen. Something else to pray about. I know we all have all this spare time that we're just trying to figure out what we can put into that spare time. Chattanooga, when we first got to Badger Road, as I said, I was driving up the road with Earl, and then I was driving up the road myself. And Badger Road would, because my family was young during the winter, there was volunteers that would ride with me. Cutter Degerlin rode with me for a long time. Dan Chase rode with me for a good bit, and so is Travis Chase. And as we're driving from North Pole to Circle, there's this community that we would drive through every week. And that community was Chattanooga. There's no church there. And so every week I would pray about this community. And finally here a few years ago, the Lord opened a door for us to move out here, put us halfway between town and Circle, made that trip a little bit closer. But then it allowed us to start reaching out. And the majority of our reaching out has actually just been people on the road. Ben, we picked up. He was hiking at 30 below. I say hiking because he wasn't hitchhiking. And Lisa, Shane and Lisa as well. And the majority of the people that we have met out there, we've just met doing our everyday life. And through that, we've gotten a small group of people gathered that are meeting in our living room. And so our normal Sunday has been Chattanooga in the morning and Circle in the afternoon. We're going to flip-flop that here in a couple of weeks. But pray about that. You know, we'd like to see there's options where we can perhaps take that into another building, or what our plan is current is to start holding services in our garage as people as that ministry grows. But you know, that Chattanooga ministry has just been, for the most part, us being in tune with what God wanted us to do. It wasn't me trying to find something else to do. God just layered it on. We were there, and people were available, and we were communicative. And God opened a door, and praise the Lord for that. The first time I tried to buy this property, by the way, God sold it out from under me in a week. You know, God said no. And I just thought no meant no. But you know what? No meant wait. Because God still had to put a well in. That was like somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000. And he had to put a septic in, and he had to put a cabin in. It wasn't ready for us yet. And praise the Lord for that. So well, it is 10 o'clock, and we'll stop here. Anybody have any questions? Okay. It's all yours, brother.
All right. Thank you, Brother Nathan. Gives us a good bird's eye view of God's call for the Smoot family up here, and some insights into their ministry as it's developed in some of these locations. And that's what we wanted to lead in with, just so that we all have some perspective on their work, especially for those of you that haven't got to know them as well as I have yet. And so we praise the Lord for all that, and we'll certainly keep these things in prayer. In fact, we'll take a few minutes here as we close this session this morning to pray for those matters. And then we'll look forward to coming back together at 10:30 for our worship service this morning and for the preaching. All right.